It was an ordinary afternoon, one of those quiet moments where life seemed predictable until everything changed. My name is Ethan, and for the past 10 years, I had been convinced I was living in a stable and loving marriage with my wife, Rebecca. We didn't have children, but we had built a life together, a home filled with laughter, late-night conversations, and dreams of the future. Or so I thought that day. On a whim, I decided to leave work early. It wasn't something I usually did, but I wanted to surprise Rebecca. She had been distant lately, claiming work stress was overwhelming her. I figured a small, thoughtful gesture might help, so I picked up her favorite bouquet and headed to the little cafe she loved, hoping to take her out for a spontaneous coffee date. As I pulled into a parking spot, I spotted her through the large window. She was sitting at a corner table, leaning in close to a man I didn't recognize. He was well-dressed, confident-looking, and they were deep in conversation. Rebecca was laughing, a real, unguarded laugh that I hadn't seen in years. Her hand was resting lightly on his, a touch filled with familiarity. My stomach twisted. For a brief moment, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was an old friend or a client from work. Maybe there was some innocent explanation. But deep down, something felt terribly wrong. Clutching the bouquet, I walked inside, my heart pounding. They didn't even notice me at first. I stood just a few steps away, waiting. Finally, Rebecca looked up, and in that instant, her expression shifted from happiness to shock. The color drained from her face. "Ethan," she stammered, snatching her hand back as if that would erase what I'd just seen. And the man turned toward me, his face unreadable. He didn't look guilty or apologetic. If anything, there was an air of quiet amusement in his eyes, like he had expected this moment. I didn't say a word. Instead, I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small note I had hastily written in the car, and placed it in front of her. The words were simple: "Don't come home." She stared at the note, her hands trembling. The man glanced at it before leaning back in his chair, completely unfazed. "Ethan, let me explain," Rebecca began, her voice laced with urgency. I turned and walked away before she could say another word. As I stepped outside, I tossed the bouquet into a nearby trash bin. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. My wife, my Rebecca, had been sitting there with another man, laughing, touching his hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. But the worst part, this was just the beginning. That night, despite my note, Rebecca came home. I heard the front door open as if nothing had happened. No hesitation, no sign of guilt, just the quiet click of her heels against the hardwood floor. I was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV, though it wasn't even turned on. My mind was racing, replaying the scene from the cafe over and over. The way she had laughed. The way she had touched his hand. The way she had looked at him. "Ethan," she called softly, setting her purse down near the door. "We need to talk." I didn't move. She sighed and took a few steps closer. "You think..." "Stop." My voice came out colder than I expected. I turned to look at her, my expression unreadable. "You don't get to explain this away." She hesitated but then sat on the edge of the couch. The audacity of her, to act so composed, so in control, made my blood boil. "It's not what you think," she started, her tone overly measured, as if she were calming a child. I let out a bitter laugh. "Really? Because what I think is that my wife was on a date this afternoon. Holding another man's hand. Laughing with him in a way she hasn't with me in years." I leaned forward. "So please, Rebecca. Tell me how I'm wrong." She flinched slightly but didn't falter. "He's just a friend." "A friend?" I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. I stood up, pacing the room. "You don't hold hands with just a friend, Rebecca. You don't look at them like they mean the world to you. You don't..." I stopped, shaking my head. "You don't betray your husband like that." For the briefest moment, I saw it, the flicker of guilt in her eyes. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced with something else. "Defiance." "You're overreacting," she said. "You're blowing this out of proportion." "Don't," I snapped, my patience shattering. "Don't insult me." I turned to face her fully. "I saw you. I saw everything." She crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. "Fine. You want the truth?" Her voice was sharp now. "Yes. I've been seeing him." The words hit like a punch to the gut, but it's not what you think," she continued quickly. "It's not serious. It's complicated." "Complicated?" I echoed, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Tell me, Rebecca, what exactly is complicated about betraying the person who trusted you?" "I didn't cheat," she snapped. "Not physically, anyway." I let out another humorless laugh. "Oh, well, that makes it so much better, doesn't it?" Her expression hardened. "I'd been unhappy, Ethan. For a long time. And he listens to me. He understands me in a way you don't anymore." Silence filled the space between us. Cold and suffocating. "So, this is my fault?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She didn't respond. I exhaled slowly, trying to push down the wave of emotions threatening to drown me. "You could have talked to me, Rebecca. You could have told me you were unhappy. But instead, you went behind my back." "I didn't plan for this to happen," she murmured. "It just did." I stared at her, feeling a strange mix of anger and exhaustion. "Then why are you here? Why did you even come back?" She hesitated. "Because I wasn't ready to leave yet." The sheer audacity of that statement left me momentarily speechless, but then I found my voice. And it was steady. Unshaken. "Then let me make this easier for you," I said. "Pack your things and go." She blinked, as if she hadn't expected that response. "Ethan, no," I shook my head. "You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." For a moment, I thought she might argue. But she didn't. Instead, she turned and walked upstairs to pack. As I listened to the sound of drawers opening and closing, a strange numbness settled over me. I wasn't sure if it was relief or devastation, but one thing was certain: this wasn't over. Rebecca didn't take long to pack. 15 minutes later, she walked down the stairs with a single suitcase. She didn't look at me as she set it by the door, her fingers gripping the handle so tightly her knuckles turned white. For a brief second, she hesitated, like she wanted to say something. Maybe a final defense. Maybe an apology. I didn't care. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice steady. I wasn't sure why I even asked. Maybe it was old habit, that lingering sense of duty after a decade of marriage. "To a friend's place," she replied curtly, still avoiding eye contact. I let out a humorless laugh. "Is it him?" Her shoulders tensed. That tiny, fleeting pause told me everything I needed to know. "You know what? Don't answer that," I said, waving my hand dismissively. "Just go." She exhaled sharply, grabbed her suitcase, and walked out without another word. The moment the door clicked shut, silence settled over the house. The kind of silence that felt too big, too empty for what felt like hours. I sat on the couch, staring at the spot where she had stood. My mind was a mess of memories, late-night conversations, lazy Sundays, whispered "I love yous" that now felt like lies. Had I been blind this whole time? Had she always been this person, and I just refused to see it? I didn't know how long I sat there. But then, my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was Rebecca. Maybe a last-minute attempt to explain herself, but it wasn't her. It was a message from an unknown number. "You did the right thing, Ethan." I frowned, my pulse spiking. "She's not worth it. Thought you should know what she's been up to. Check your email." I stared at the message, my heart pounding. Who was this, and how did they know about Rebecca? Curiosity gnawed me. I grabbed my laptop, logged into my email, and immediately spotted a new message with the subject line of "The truth about Rebecca." I hesitated. Did I really want to know? Of course, I did. I clicked the email. And what I saw made my blood run cold. There were pictures. Dozens of them, not just of the man from the cafe, Rebecca and him at a hotel. Walking hand in hand. Kissing. Of the timestamps on the photos went back months, and then there was the video, a shaky, low-quality clip of them in a hotel room. Rebecca's voice was unmistakable as she laughed and said, "Ethan will never find out. He's too trusting." I slammed the laptop shut, my chest tightening. This wasn't just an emotional affair. She had lied to my face. Betrayed me. Made a fool out of me, and now, someone else was rubbing it in. The worst part, I had no idea who had sent the email, but I was going to find out. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the images from the email. Rebecca with him. The way she smiled. The way she touched him. The way she spoke about me like I was nothing. By morning, exhaustion had given way to something sharper. determination. Whoever sent that message knew more than I did. And I needed answers. I grabbed my phone and typed out a reply. Who are you? Why are you doing this? The response came minutes later. A friend. Let's just say I know Rebecca better than you think. She's not who you believe she is. If you want the full story, meet me at the park near your house at 2 p.m. I'll be wearing a black hoodie. I stared at the message, debating whether I was walking into something stupid, but if there was more to Rebecca's betrayal, I had to know. By 1:45 p.m., I was parked near the entrance of the park, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. At exactly 2 p.m., I spotted him. A man in a black hoodie, sitting alone on a bench under a large oak tree, taking a deep breath. I stepped out of the car and walked toward him. As I got closer, I could see he was in his mid-30s. His face was partially hidden by the hood, but I didn't recognize him. You're Ethan, he said, his voice low and steady. Yeah. And you are? He smirked slightly. Call me Daniel. He gestured to the bench. Sit. I hesitated, then did. How do you know Rebecca? I asked. Daniel let out a bitter chuckle. I used to work with her. We were close. Until I learned the hard way what kind of person she really is. My stomach twisted. What do you mean? He pulled out his phone and handed it to me. Look for yourself. On the screen was a long string of messages. Rebecca's name was at the top, but the contact was saved under Eric. My breath caught as I started reading. The texts were explicit. Not just emotionally intimate, physical. Detailed descriptions of their meetings. Plans to keep me in the dark. She's been seeing him for almost a year, Daniel said. Eric's married too, by the way. My hands clenched around the phone. I found out when I caught them at an office party, he continued. They didn't even care that I saw them. She told me to mind my own business. I felt sick. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Why now? Daniel exhaled. Because I've been where you are. I know what it's like to feel like a fool. I thought you deserved to know the truth before she drags you down any further. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to thank him, the other part wanted to scream. This wasn't just betrayal, this was humiliation, planned and executed right under my nose. Daniel watched me carefully. People like Rebecca don't change, Ethan. I stood up, barely keeping myself together. I need to go. Yeah, he said, nodding. I figured. I walked back to my car, my hands shaking as I reached for the door handle. Rebecca thought she could play me for a fool, but she was about to learn just how wrong she was. Driving home from the park, my mind was racing. Daniel's words echoed in my head. She's been seeing him for almost a year. I gritted my teeth, my fingers tightening around the steering wheel. How long had she been lying to me? How many times had she come home, kissed me, smiled at me, acted like nothing was wrong, while sneaking around with him? The thought made me sick. I wasn't just angry. I was done. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I knew what I had to do. I walked inside, grabbed my laptop, and started digging. Daniel had given me a name. Eric. It didn't take long to find him. Social media made it easy. There he was, perfectly curated, smiling in family photos, his wife and 2 kids standing beside him. He looked like the perfect husband. The perfect father. What a joke. I clicked through his posts, saving screenshots. His job profile. His work email. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, but I wanted to be prepared. Rebecca and Eric thought they were untouchable. They were about to find out how wrong they were. My phone buzzed. A message from Rebecca. I need to pick up the rest of my things tomorrow. Will you be home? Her audacity was unbelievable. She had barely been gone for a day, and she was already acting like this was just a mild inconvenience. I stared at the message, my jaw tightening. Then I typed back, I'll be here. Come at 5. The next day, I spent hours preparing. I printed everything. The photos, the texts, the emails. I spread them neatly across the dining room table, like evidence in a trial. At exactly 5 p.m., the doorbell rang. Rebecca stood there, dressed impeccably, as if nothing had happened. Her expression was unreadable, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. I'm just here to grab my stuff, she said, brushing past me toward the stairs. Not so fast. I stepped in front of her. We need to talk. She rolled her eyes. Ethan, we've already been through this. No, I said sharply. You listen this time. I pointed to the dining table. Sit down. She hesitated. Then her eyes flicked to the papers. I saw the moment she realized what they were. Her face paled slowly. She sat down, her hands fidgeting in her lap. "What is this?" she asked. But we both knew she already knew. I spread out the papers, my voice cold and steady. "This is everything. The texts. The photos. The hotel visits. Eric's life, his wife, his kids." I met her eyes. "You thought I was too blind to figure it out. But guess what, Rebecca? I know everything." She stared at the evidence, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Ethan, I can explain." I slammed my hand on the table, making her flinch. "You've done enough talking." Silence stretched between us. She exhaled shakily. "What do you want from me?" I leaned in, my voice low. "I don't want anything from you, Rebecca." She swallowed hard, looking away. "You destroyed our marriage. You humiliated me. And now, you're going to live with the consequences." For the first time, I saw real panic in her eyes. "What do you mean?" she whispered. I smiled. She was about to find out. Rebecca's breath hitched. I could see the fear creeping into her expression, but she was trying to hide it. "Ethan," she said carefully, "what exactly have you done?" I leaned back in my chair, watching her squirm. "I just made sure the right people knew the truth." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "What does that mean?" I slid one of the papers toward her. "You recognize this, don't you? It's an email. A very detailed one. Sent to Eric's wife." Rebecca's face drained of color. I thought she deserved to know, don't you?" I cut in, my voice sharp. "After all, you didn't care about his family. Why should I?" She blinked rapidly, as if trying to process the weight of what I had done. "You have no right to interfere in his marriage," she hissed. I let out a cold laugh. "Oh, but you did?" I shook my head. "Spare me, Rebecca. You didn't care about his wife and kids when you were sneaking around behind my back. Now, suddenly, you're concerned?" She opened her mouth, then shut it, realizing there was nothing she could say. "Good." I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the empty street. "It's funny," I murmured. "You spent months lying to me. Laughing at me. But the moment you face consequences, you panic." Rebecca's chair scraped against the floor as she stood abruptly. "Ethan, this is insane. What do you want? Revenge?" I turned to face her. "I want you to leave." She swallowed, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You've already done enough," I continued. "But this? This is the last time you ever walk into this house like you have a right to be here." Her lips parted like she was about to argue, but then she snapped her mouth shut. For once, she had nothing to say. I watched as she grabbed her suitcase and stormed toward the door. She hesitated for just a second. Then she turned back to me, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to do this." I held her gaze, my expression unreadable. "No, Rebecca. You didn't have to do this." She exhaled sharply, then walked out, and just like that, she was gone. But the storm wasn't over yet. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages, some from mutual friends. Some from numbers I didn't recognize. But the most interesting ones, one from Rebecca, and two from an unknown number. Rebecca's was short and furious. "What the hell did you do, Ethan?" The unknown number's messages, however, were even more intriguing. "You crossed the line. Stay out of my life, or you'll regret it." And then another, "Coward. Dragging my family into this? You'll pay for that." I stared at the messages, a slow smirk creeping onto my face. "Eric, looks like Michelle had confronted him." "Good." I scrolled through my contacts and found Michelle's number. Me. "How did it go?" Her response came minutes later. "Michelle, he denied it at first. Then I showed him the proof. He blamed me. Said I pushed him into it." I clenched my jaw. "Of course he did." Me. "Sounds familiar. Rebecca said the same thing." "Michelle, they're cowards. But I'm not done with him yet." I exhaled, running a hand through my hair. Rebecca and Eric thought they could walk away from this unscathed. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The next few days were anything but quiet. Word spread fast. Friends, co-workers, even distant acquaintances started reaching out. Some wanted to check in on me, but most just wanted the story. Rebecca, unsurprisingly, played the victim. She told people I had overreacted, that I was obsessed with punishing her. That I had ruined her life over a mistake. A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is misplacing your keys. A year-long affair is not a mistake, some people believed her. Some stayed neutral. But others, people I had once considered friends, had the audacity to question me. One evening, my phone rang. It was Claire, a mutual friend who had known Rebecca for years. Ethan, she started hesitantly. I just heard about everything. Are you okay? I hesitated. Claire and Rebecca had always been close, and I wasn't sure if I could trust her. But I decided to be honest, honestly. No, Claire. I'm not okay. My voice was cold, controlled. Rebecca cheated on me. Lied to me. And now I'm the bad guy because I refused to let her sweep it under the rug? Claire sighed. Look, I'm not saying what she did was right, but maybe you could have handled it differently. People are talking, Ethan. You made things messy. Messy, I gripped the phone tighter. Messy? I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. Claire, she betrayed me. What did you expect me to do? Sit quietly while she walked all over me? Claire was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, she said, I don't know. It's complicated. No, I said simply. It's not. She exhaled. I hope you find some peace, Ethan. I hung up without another word, but amidst all the chaos, there was one moment of clarity. Michelle called me again, her tone sharper than before. Ethan, she said, I think it's time we take this further. I frowned. What do you mean? I spoke to a lawyer, she said, and if you're willing, I think we should both file formal complaints against them. I sat up straighter. Complaints? Eric's company has a strict policy about workplace affairs, Michelle explained. If we go through with this, he could lose his job. And Rebecca? She works with him. This could affect her too. I was silent for a moment, letting the words sink in. It felt drastic, but at the same time, they had crossed every boundary imaginable. Let's do it, I said finally. It's time they faced the full weight of what they've done. Michelle exhaled, and for the first time, I heard something in her voice that mirrored what I felt, relief. A week later, the wheels were in motion. We both filed complaints. Michelle had enough evidence from Eric's emails and messages to back up everything. I provided additional documentation, photos, texts, even timestamped proof of their meetings. The fallout was immediate. Eric's company launched an internal investigation. Within days, he was placed on leave. Rebecca, whose work often overlapped with Eric's, was also questioned. Their so-called discreet affair was anything but. By the end of the month, the results were clear. Eric was fired. Rebecca's contract with her firm wasn't renewed. They thought they were untouchable. Turns out, they were just careless. With the dust finally settling, I started focusing on rebuilding my life. The house, once filled with painful memories, began to feel like mine again. I redecorated. Removed every trace of Rebecca. One evening, as I was unpacking old boxes, I found a photo from our wedding day. Rebecca looked radiant. I remembered how happy I had been. It was a bittersweet moment. I didn't hate her anymore. Not entirely. The anger had faded, replaced by something quieter, acceptance. She made her choices, and I made mine. As for Michelle, she became an unexpected ally. We met for coffee occasionally, reflecting on everything that had happened. One day, she said something that stuck with me. You can't let this define you, Ethan. It's part of your story. But it's not the whole book. She was right. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free.